Hello, and welcome to another episode of Shampoo and Booze. This is episode number 54 on shampooandbooze.com. We are restarting the podcast today. Yes, it has been a while since the last episode. Episode 53 was months and months and months ago. But we're doing a new thing. So I am here with my sister, Ashley.
Hello.
Hi, Ashley. Hi.
Hi.
So Ashley is going to start doing the podcast with me. She has done Airbnb. She's an Airbnb host, so it's actually perfect. She's the perfect person to restart the podcast with me. So Ashley, tell us a little about your Airbnb history.
Okay, I will. Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be restarting this with you. So my Airbnb history is that, unlike Ryan, I was renting an Airbnb in my apartment. So it was its own room, a guest room. And
a private room,
exactly,
they say, right?
And originally it was in my 4-bedroom apartment, which I thought nobody would be interested in. But as soon as I put myself on Airbnb, it just went bananas. And so I did that for several months. And then eventually I moved to a different apartment where I am now. And I have a 2-bedroom and I rent out one of my bedrooms.
Now, the funny thing is you were the first person to tell me about Airbnb.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I remember, I think it was in like 2008 or 2009. And I remember you telling me, oh, my friends are going to go stay in some city and they're just going to rent an Airbnb. And I'm like, I don't know what that is. And you're like, oh, it's this place where you can like rent rooms or rent apartments. And I looked at it and I was like, that's amazing.
That's so
you
funny.
Introduced it. Yeah, I remember you telling me that. And, you know, vacation rentals are big where we live. So I was like, we could just do that, you know?
Oh my gosh, that's so funny. I didn't realize
Yeah.
that was the beginning.
That was
the beginning. So, yeah, so basically, I mean, you know, you and I have forever and ever been interested in space, interior design, you know, working with renovations, you know.
Right.
I mean, really, we grew up that way. Our parents kind of flipping their own houses. And, and so, yeah, so I have been really interested in how to run Airbnb better. My listing right now is on hold, but I have been running it for the last, year and a half. And so,
yeah. And what's cool about your Airbnb is basically having right now you're in a 2-bedroom, renting out that second bedroom pays for your rent and more.
Yes. Yeah. In the busy season. So I'm in Boston, right. And in the busy season is the summertime. And then I've found that things really slow down in the winter. So, which is part of why I'm sort of in holding pattern right now, is because the summer season just started and I'm trying to decide if I'm going to open it up again. So anyway, we can talk much more about all of the ins and outs, but I'm super excited to be in podcast land.
Yeah, totally. Like, I'm really glad to be talking to someone who's doing a different kind of Airbnb, because obviously Jay and I are like renovating whole houses, and to have people in your space and to be interacting with people in your house is such a different perspective.
It's totally different. Yeah. And what I love about, you know, whenever we chat about this, it's like, oh, we don't experience that. Or, you know, right. I'm like, oh, I don't think about that at all, you know? So I think it's good to just see what comes up in our different scenarios.
Yeah, I'm like, oh, you have to talk to people? That's crazy. So I did want to touch upon, you actually studied architecture and design in college. I often forget that. I always just am like, oh, you went to art school.
Yeah.
Oh, no, you actually like studied architecture and design. So this is sort of like a perfect world for you.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's funny. I feel like, I don't know if you feel this way about art school, but, you know, it was like, I had like a very liberal arts education, which means that people who actually went to architecture school, they're like, you didn't really study architecture. You know?
They're like, what school did you go to?
And
no,
I don't think so. And like, I also like learned Spanish. You know, it was like a little bit.
And pottery.
Exactly. It was like a little bit all over the universe.
Right.
But at the same time, I mean, the thing I loved so much about studying design and visual arts and architecture was just the experience of seeing what other people are doing, you know, and being able to be creative and dream big, even though that doesn't necessarily translate into going into the career of architecture, you know?
Yeah,
I mean, that's
totally.
what I always struggled with, was I felt like the study of design and visual arts doesn't always translate, at least especially in the architecture world, into what you're going to be doing day to day. So that was a little disappointing for me. It's part of the reason why I think I went a scrappier route, you know, which was like learning how to renovate, build, you know, do things kind of on my own and not worry so much about the career path part of it.
Right. I mean, I studied, God, what did I study? Video and performance. And like, but also, you know, it's sort of like that artistic and creative part of you that wants to transform spaces. And also, like, look, I studied performance. It's all about experiences.
Exactly.
So that's exactly what we're talking about with Airbnb, where you're like, I want these people to have this specific experience.
Exactly.
When they walk in the door, this is how I want them to feel.
Right.
So, you know, it's a very similar thing, designing spaces and creating experiences through furniture and art.
Yep.
And, you know, a house or an apartment. I feel like it's perfect for artists. Like, it totally speaks to that part of, like, my brain.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you and I are both always nerding out about, like, the moment we walk into a house or see a space, you know, we're immediately jumping into like, ooh, how would I do it? Or, ooh, how would I change that? Or, oh, I can't believe they did this, you know? So anyway, yeah, I'm excited to just explore these parts. 'Cause I think that, you know, we're doing this every day. And so to be able to like offer this kind of conversation to other people who want to start an Airbnb, are already running Airbnbs, you know, are having their own questions and, you know, things, war stories, you know, all the things that happen out of, you know, doing short-term rentals, whether it's on Airbnb or elsewhere. But I feel like we have a lot to offer.
So I did want to do a quick update on Jay and my renovations, because we did kind of cut the podcast short several months ago. Honestly, just due to time constraints and burnout. Like, after our second Airbnb house renovation, I was like exhausted. And just everything, plus that doubled our Airbnb business, which we were like, now we have two. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's like double the cleaners and like double the laundry and double the maintenance. Like, you know that's gonna happen, and then it's happening and you're like, you know.
Yeah, I mean, with that second building going on, I feel like you guys had to majorly hit the ground running in a way that you hadn't had to before.
Like, one of the things we did, we probably didn't talk about this on the podcast because it happened afterwards. The first people that were staying at our renovated house, we accidentally double booked. It was like, that is your nightmare, and it is happening right now.
Oh my! And why? How did you double book? How did that happen?
So anyone who does short-term rentals that has Airbnb and other places like VRBO, someone had booked on VRBO. It was like the first week that was open. And then thank God, it was a friend of ours. A friend of ours was coming down, and we looked at our Airbnb calendar and saw that it was blocked off. And we thought, oh, maybe we blocked that off because we were coming home from a trip. We were in Scandinavia for a month. So we had just like finished this renovation. I was exhausted. We were like driving through Scandinavia. It was like the craziest trip. I can't complain about it, but still, I was exhausted. So we just like didn't know what we were doing. So we unblocked it. We're like, why did we block that week? Maybe we thought we weren't going to be ready when we got home or something. So we unblocked that week and like said, oh, you can stay there then, you know? I mean, we kept it blocked, but we were like, you can come down. And then I got this message that night that the people were checking in, like, from VRBO. I don't know why they send it so late, but they send it at, like, 4 p.m. They're like, so-and-so just got a check-in welcome email. And I was like, I called Jay on the phone wherever he was. He was somewhere in town. And I was like, oh, my God, there are actual paying guests checking in, like, right now. And our friends were driving down from somewhere, and we had to be like, we have to find you a different rental.
Oh my God.
So that
is like just, your nightmare.
It was an absolute nightmare. And well, what we discovered actually from on Airbnb, which is great, is if you have VRBO or TripAdvisor or whatever, if someone, you know, books through there, you can go into Airbnb and you can block that off. And then write yourself a note. So if VRBO is blocked off for like 3 days, I type VRBO and then like the person's name. So you're not like, why did I block that off? Unblock. Like,
yeah, right.
Why would
double
you do
book,
that?
Immediate double book.
So that was just an example of like kind of the adjustment period of like, oh yeah, this is not like, it's almost exponential. It's not just double. It's like, you just have to keep everything kind of like going at once. I mean, I got used to it pretty quick. It was like, okay, there's 2 houses now. There's 2 sets of laundry. There's 2 different cleaners that do the houses. But actually, so some people who are listening to this also listen to Scavenger Life. But for those of you who don't, we actually purchased a building on Main Street. We live in a small rural town, and we are always complaining about Main Street. And we're like, we always say, somebody ought to do this on Main Street. Somebody ought to fix up that building on Main Street. And finally, we were like, and nobody else is going to do this. Or if they do, they're not going to do it the way we want to. So we just need to buy a building.
It's like when you look around and you're like, anyone? No, no one. Okay, I guess we have to buy this building.
Is anyone going to redo the facade of the... Okay, no, you're not going to? Okay. So we bought a building last July. So that was like a little less than a year ago. And it's a mixed-use building, so there's a 3-bedroom apartment upstairs. And then downstairs, the first floor, we're planning on doing a co-working space, a co-working office. And then on the bottom floor, that used to be a basement, but it has places where you can cut out windows that used to be there and doors. And we're like, we're going to have private offices down here. Like, this is going to get used. So that's happening. We are almost done renovating the apartment. So I'm doing like the finishing touches when you're like hanging curtain rods and like hanging hooks and like bringing furniture in. You're like, we're almost done. So that's happening right now. And then we kind of have to do it in stages. It's almost renovating. It's like renovating 3 houses. It's like, okay, this is like 3 houses in one. Hopefully the bottom 2 floors will go faster. But, when we bought the building, just really quick, we bought the building, we were like, this building's in great shape. And then you're like, oh, it has no like HVAC system, or the HVAC system that was on the first floor wasn't connected to the 3rd floor. They just had like window AC units that had heaters on them. Like, it was so bizarre. We were like, oh my God. The electrical was the original electrical from 100 years ago in parts of the building. It's like, oh, there's knob and tube with asbestos, like,
my God,
braided cord. We were like, oh my God, we need to like rip out the ceiling and like redo this. So,
yeah. So basically, you've not been doing anything for the last year.
Yeah, we've been on vacation.
You've been eating bonbons on the couch.
Yeah. So yeah, clearly we are like still expanding. Every time we buy a building and finish renovating it, we're like, should we keep buying buildings or should we just like pay off our debt? So,
well, and maybe we'll plug that workshop that we just did.
Yeah, so
maybe we'll write it in our description, but we just did this super cool workshop.
Yeah, so it was interesting. There's this nonprofit organization called Incremental Development Alliance, I think that's what it's called. And people in my town have been telling me about this workshop, about this concept of small incremental development. And like, I went to an introduction to the workshop. It was like an hour-long introduction, and I was like, oh my God, there's a word for this. Like, what we're doing, especially with the building on Main Street, you know, people are like, we're trying to transform this town. So we started buying buildings, and we started renovating them, and we put a little donut shop in one and an office in another, and now downtown is cool. And I'm like, oh, that's
what
us.
You're doing.
Yeah.
And for your area, I mean, for you all to be, you know, I feel like for some of the city folk listening, you know, a co-working space is like no big deal.
Yeah,
but for the area that you live in, it's a really big deal. It doesn't exist.
Right.
And in some ways, you're really experimenting to see, you know, how does this go? So yeah. I feel like you're doing that model of slow incremental development.
Yeah. I mean, and it's slow because of money. I mean, it's always any renovation. Look, all renovations, even if you have all the money up front, they still take a long time no matter what. But a lot of times it's slow for us because we're like, okay, we have to like make that money before we're not taking out like building loans. Yeah.
Right. We need to make that money before we spend it.
Yeah, exactly. So it takes, but honestly, I feel like I kind of like doing things that way because it allows us to sort of like, there's like a gestation period where you're like, are we sure we want to do it this way? Like, is this what we want? I mean, not for an apartment necessarily. You're like, yes, we know what we want to do here. But for the offices and things like that, you're kind of like, you can take time. You can also take time to like get materials on Craigslist and like find cool furniture. And so that's the upside of it. I mean, I would love for our building to have been done, you know, whatever, in 6 months, but that's just not. They're also like rebuilding the bridge on Main Street in front of our building. So that construction started like the day we bought the building. So we've been sitting in construction right in front of our building because we're right on the bridge. Like we're right next to it. So
you've been up to your eyeballs.
Yeah, like I was staining the windows today. We replaced all the windows and they're wood on the inside. And I was like staining every little crevice and just like watching the dudes like build the bridge today. It's just like
slow,
they're almost
incremental development.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the cool thing about tying back into this podcast is, so for that mixed use building, you're developing an apartment for upstairs that will be on Airbnb. Right. So now you'll have, you know, a space that's almost like in town, whereas your other spaces are outside of town. So I feel like you're going to have a different audience for that rental.
Yeah. So anyway, that's my update. That's what we've been doing. We're still expanding. We're still doing short-term rentals, but looking more at like mixed use because where we live, you know, having private properties is awesome, but, you know, we live here full time. So we're kind of like, if we can transform buildings downtown and also do our Airbnb short-term rental, vacation rental business, that's like a win-win, you know? If we can help transform the town like in a public way, but also be doing, you know, what we think is interesting and what makes us money, we think that's exciting.
Yeah, well, it was one of the principles in the incremental development, you know, presentation, which was if you're going to be doing incremental development, you better be basically living in the neighborhoods in which you're doing development, because otherwise they called it's just extractive. So otherwise you're just like, we're going to buy low and sell high, you know, which is, you know, obviously has its problems in lots of different communities. So, so anyway, cheers to you doing that kind of work, because it's not easy and it's a little bit thankless, but also you're like working on your town that you love.
Yeah, and it's funny because it's like, it seems endless, but then you get to this point where you are, like I said, moving in furniture and like doing curtains, and you're like, oh my God, are we done right now? Like that just is, we're done. So that's a good feeling when that happens. And then it's like when people have like multiple children and they're like, I'll never do that again. And then they like have another kid. It's just like that. It's like you have amnesia once you like finish, and then you get those payout emails. you're like, oh yeah,
you're like, that's
let's do another
working.
one.
Actually, that's working. My cat is chiming in.
Yeah.
Just FYI.
Okay, that's fine. We're very cat friendly on all our podcasts,
he has a lot
as many
to say.
people know. Okay, so my update is done for now. So let's talk about why we're restarting the podcast. We had gotten a bunch of messages over the time that we had paused our podcast, like, where's Shampoo and Booze? Where's Shampoo and Booze? And we're just like, we don't have time. We only have so much energy and like whatever. And that's true. But
that
I
hasn't
do
changed.
really, and that's no. But I do really love talking about Airbnb and short-term rentals and doing renovations and doing space design. I really miss that a lot. I think about it all the time. Like you said, literally I'll be in a doctor's waiting room and I'll be like, why did they put the chairs like that? Like, I wish they would turn the TV off. That's like, nobody needs that, you know? Every restaurant I walk into, I'm like, why would they put that there?
100%.
You know, like, or look, they did a great job. You're the same way. I mean, we'll sit in a space and be like, you know, analyzing it. So,
yeah,
you know,
100%.
So you were visiting me, and I was saying a couple of things. I was like, I really miss this podcast, and also, and here's our little elevator pitch. I'm like, I kind of want to become like an Airbnb consultant. Like, nothing, no big deal. Just kind of like offer some services that can help other people, because I will stay. We stayed in an Airbnb when you came and visited because our workshop was a little bit far away. And, you know, we were sitting there and we were like, you know, analyzing the space and thinking of how things could be different. And I'm like, I would love to offer that service to people.
We walked in, and I mean, within moments of coming to the front door, you know, we were like, oh, that's interesting. Oh, they have a key and a door lock? What's that about? You know, it's like immediately we're like, exactly. Oh, okay, that's an interesting choice. All right, okay. You know, it's like our favorite thing to do. I mean, I've had people multiple times be like, you should do this for a living, dude. You know?
Right, exactly. So that's part of what we're doing here on the podcast. I mean, we're going to talk about how to run Airbnb business and what's interesting to us, and take people's questions. But we also do have a services page. So we have like several tiers of services. We have like a listing optimization service, we have a basic design service, and we have an advanced design service where we want to give people advice on how they can either just start their Airbnb or how they can make it better. That's something like I've even looked at friends' listings where they're like, oh, I started this Airbnb, and I'm just like looking at every photo like, oh, the bed would be so much better in this position, and they have to make sure they have side tables.
Exactly.
And, you know, like things like that I'm just like, you know, I obviously would love to do that for free, but we are charging for it. It is a service. I think it would be really fun if people are interested in that. You can look on the blog, shampooandbooze.com, our services page, or we are actually calling our little design team Not Perfect Design. So we actually have the URL, notperf.com. And that goes right to our services page.
Which, you know, and like the thinking behind it is just don't let perfect be the enemy of the good. You know, Ryan and I think of ourselves as being like part classy and part scrappy, which means, you know, we're really interested in people using what they have and making the best out of what they have. So lots of people aren't going to hire an interior designer because they think they're, it's out of their league, or it's, not worth the money or whatever. And so we want to offer advice for what you have. And that might include, you need to buy a few things, or you need to, spiff this up here and there. But I feel really committed to helping people figure out how to make do with the space that they have.
Right. And, like, obviously I have a podcast called scavengerlife.com. So it's sort of like I'm all about using what you have, or finding things on Craigslist, or finding things on eBay, and just making it work, but making it better than other places. Like, you and I know this from hosting and making spaces, but also going to spaces where you're like, this place would have been so much better if X, Y, and Z. Like, just the littlest details could have, like, transformed my whole experience.
Exactly. And we'll talk through a lot of that on the podcast. Like, I feel like the podcast is where we get to sort of wax about everything, and really give our suggestions and our advice. But then if you want more individualized advice, whether it's looking at your listing, looking at your space through pictures, actually giving you suggestions for what to buy, we basically can offer all of those things.
So check out our services page, or go to notperf.com, and that will go right to our services page. So that is it for the podcast this week. Welcome back. Welcome, Ashley. We're happy to have her.
Yay.
If you want to send questions or comments about anything you heard, you can send an audio file that you recorded on your phone to shampooandbooze@gmail.com. We're going to end this podcast in 3, 2, 1. Bye.
Woo, bye.